So I'm finally happy to say that I am now the proud owner of not just a CZ 805 Bren 1, but also a CZ Bren 2, also known as the 806. Now, before I get too much more into either of these, I want to point out the nomenclature I'm going to be using to refer to these two guns. This is going to be the Bren 2. And this I'm going to call the 805. I might slip up sometimes and call it the Bren 1, but I'm going to do it that way because that's what everyone knows these guns as. This was primarily known as the 805 while it was the predominant rifle in CZ's market, and this has always just been the Bren 2. So for the sake of everyone knowing what I'm talking about, this is the Bren 2. This is not the Bren 1, might sometimes be, but it is the 805. But the reason I have these here today is because you might know I like Czech rifles, and these are both the most recent iteration of CZ's rifles for the Czech Armed Forces. I think it might help to start off from where both of these rifles came from, and that was this guy right here. This is the VZ58, which is adopted, as the name would imply, in 1958 by the Czechoslovak Armed Forces, before they were a federal republic even. So they adopted this to replace the VZ52 rifles and their VZ24 submachine guns. This replaced both of them as both the rifle and the submachine gun, and minus obviously the red dot mount. The bipod, interestingly, was not for a light machine gun rule for this. It was actually for using a night vision device, which mounted on the side via a rail and had a conical flash hider, but that's a story for another day. Now, believe it or not, the Czechs actually used the VZ58 well into the global war on terror, so in the mid to late 2000s. And the reason they did that was because they simply didn't have anything else. The Czechs, this gun was only ever made in 7.62x39 by the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, and come the late 1980s, mid to late 1980s, they were still using the 7.62x39 cartridge, which is 123, 124 grains, doing about 2,400, 2,450 feet per second. This is their first generation intermediate cartridge. Soviets came up with this in the mid to late 40s. It was used in the AK, but it's a big, slow intermediate cartridge. The future was going to be with small caliber, higher velocity cartridges, and at the time for Czechoslovakia, that meant the 5.45x39 cartridge, which was the cartridge in use by the Soviet Union at the time. They were in the Warsaw Pact, of course, so they wanted to help standardize on their arms. Not every country did, but Czechoslovakia wanted to get in on the game. Unfortunately for them, the political ground shifted beneath their feet, and Czechoslovakia was no longer communist by the end of the 1980s. In fact, there was no Czechoslovakia by the end of the early 90s. So the idea of using 5.45 kind of was moot, and so the idea shifted to using instead, keep knocking these over, a 5.56x45 cartridge, 5.56 NATO or 223 Remington. And the gun that they were going to do this with was called the Project Lada, or eventually the CZ2000, and it was basically just an AK that was chambered in 5.45 and then 5.56, but the Czechs had their own ideas of what they wanted the rifle to be. They had a thumb selector on the left side, for example, which had both safe, semi, 3-round burst, and full auto. The disassembly was also a bit different, but the heart of the system, the bolt, the gas system, was an AK. It's very different from a VZ58. Why they didn't want to just rechamber the VZ58 in 5.45, I'm not sure. It wouldn't have been that difficult. But anyway, come the 90s and early 2000s, the Soviet Union is gone, the Warsaw Pact is gone, so now the Czech Republic wants to be in on NATO. Of course, that means using 5.56, and they were initially continuing to develop Project Lada, but having a rifle that looks like an AK reminded them of their old communist past, and they wanted to get away from that for, I guess, public relations reasons. So the decision came to, in the late mid-2000s, to scrap Project Lada entirely and move on to a completely new design. And that's where the 805 comes in. The 805 was first revealed to the public and to the Czech Armed Forces in 2006. A bit more development came after that, and it was finally ordered. The Czech government placed a tender for them in 2010, March of 2010. They ordered a few more changes to them in May, and then by early 2011, CZ had manufactured and was delivering the first batches of 805 rifles to the Czech army. Now, you'll see when we get a closer look at this rifle that it's satisfactory. It has some quirks and not problems, but areas where it could be improved. And that's where the 805 comes in. Now, it wasn't long after the first rifles were received in 2011 that in 2015, CZ revealed the Bren 2, which has improvements to the 805 system. It's mechanically similar, but very different inside. And then in 2016, they get their first batch of them. And the Bren 2 has been adopted by a number of law enforcement and military since then. Of course, the Czech Republic has bought them. Probably the other most notable customer of the Bren 2 is GIGN in France, their national gendarme. And they bought the rifles as 11-inch carbines in 7.62 by 39. Again, going back to this, set up for use with suppressors. They have their own reasoning for that, but that doesn't pertain to the Czech military use of this. The Czech military uses guns in 5.56. They use them in various lengths. CZ offers them to the civilian market in 11 and 8-inch pistols, as well as a 16-inch carbine. They did the same thing with the 805. Now, there are a number of differences between the civilian versions of both of these and the military versions. I'll get into those when we go over the rifles. But I think now is time to stop yabbering and get to looking at both these rifles, how they compare. Start with the outside, and then I'll disassemble them and show you how they differ on the inside, what improvements were made both externally and internally from the 805 to the Bren 2. All right, now I've got both of these rifles in front of me. I'm going to go over first how they're similar, what features they share in common. Obviously, both of these rifles are in 5.56 by 45. They have 5.56 chambers. Barrels are 1-in-7 twist for the heavier NATO ammunition. I just use 55 grainers in these because that's cheap. They both use Stanag magazines, although they both will also use PMags. See, Stanmags fit just fine in the Bren 2. PMags fit just fine in the 805. Set those aside for now. I'm not going to be meaning them. Normally they both have folding stocks. Of course, I'm in the middle of form wanting this into an SBR, so I don't have a stock on it right now, but it would have one. The stock designs are different. At some point, when I actually have the stock affixed to this, I'll make a video comparing them, just a short one. They both have full-length Picatinny rail running along the top. They would both normally be monolithic. The 805 here is monolithic, but the Bren 2 MS, which is the civilian version of the Bren 2, has a removable handguard. The first versions of the 805 that were brought into the United States did have monolithic uppers, but the MS ones that they introduced later have these removable handguards. This is an aftermarket HB Industries one, which is, in my opinion, vastly superior to the one that comes with the rifle from the factory. I'm sorry, the pistol from the factory. Normally they would both come with backup iron sights. I have them removed from these because I used a magnifier on the back. It didn't fit, but the Bren 2 has them. They both have mostly ambidextrous controls. Safety levers are ambidextrous, as are the magazine releases, although they are different in design. We'll get to that in a moment. The charging handles are reversible on both of them. And that's about where the similarities end externally. I'll go over the internal differences. There are some, but there are quite a bit of differences as well. Oh, I should mention one more thing. There's a bayonet issued for these that is a Tonto blade style. It comes with a couple of things on the scabbard. It has a screwdriver on the end, and you can use it as a wire cutter as well. And both of these rifles, see, this is in frame. Yes, it is. Both of these rifles will take this same bayonet. Obviously, on these are both. This bayonet is designed to go on a 14-inch carbine. So it's the barrel on the 805, my 805 anyway, is too long. It's 16 inches, but it fits beautifully on the Bren 2 with this 14-inch barrel. This is a 14-inch pistol. scabbard, and a very nice frog, which you would then attach to your belt. But anyway, that's about where the differences or the similarities end with these two. I'll start going over the differences now. We'll start at the front. Normally, they both have flash hiders. This is the actual issue flash hider that comes with the Bren 2. However, this is a muzzle brake that CZ ships with the civilian rifles. Normally, in Czech military usage, this would have a birdcage style flash hider. It's not the same as the A2, although if you put an A2 on this, the bayonet would still fit. It's the same diameter for the muzzle ring. They look kind of similar, but the design and the style is actually different. Going for the back, they both have a similar kind of skinny barrel profile to help reduce weight. The 805 needs it more than the Bren 2 does. The 805 is substantially heavier than the Bren 2. When I weigh the 805, it comes out empty with the red dot and the magnifier to just over 9.25 pounds, which is extremely heavy for what this is, just a normal 5.56 infantry rifle. The Bren 2, on the other hand, comes in rather more sveltely at right over 7.5 pounds with the optics, with everything, with the brace adapter, although the stock weighs about the same, and of the light as well. It is very, very light. It's much improvement, and that's one of the big things that they wanted to improve from the 805 to the Bren 2 was the weight. This thing is really overly heavy, and in fact, that's kind of endemic to a lot of the features of the 805. And I've said this before, the 805 is a pre-production gun that was pressed into service because the Czech Republic needed a rifle to replace the VZ58. The VZ58 in the 90s, even in the 80s, was kind of outdated. It was not very conducive to mounting optics or other accessories, and it was still using the outdated 7.62x39 cartridge. So this is better than the VZ58, mostly, but there were a lot of areas where it could be improved. Weight was another one. The other thing is the charging handle. On the 805, I mentioned that it's reversible. However, on the 805, oops, here's no, I'll get to that in a moment. The charging handle is reciprocating, just like it is on the VZ58. However, on the Bren 2, unfortunately, I can't really demonstrate it for you right now. The charging handle is non-reciprocating. When you're shooting, this does not move at all. When I push it back a little bit, you might have heard a click. And push it forward, it clicks again. That clicking it forward means it's detached from the bolt carrier, and it will cycle on its own. When you push it back just a little bit, it engages with the bolt carrier, so that means you can actually use it normally as a forward assist that way. And then it's back in battery, it'll snap itself forward and automatically detach from it. Both of the rifles have manual bolt hold opens, and they both lock open when they're empty. I'll demonstrate that real quick. So, put an empty magazine in, it will lock open. Yes, it will. On the Bren 2. Sorry. It will lock open on an empty magazine. However, another difference is that the 805 does not have a bolt release. Once you insert a full magazine into it, you then have to slingshot the charging handle in order to close the bolt again. You do not have to do that on the Bren 2. It actually has not one, but 2 bolt releases. It has a normal AR-style ping-pong paddle on the side, which will close the bolt. However, it also has this nifty little guy in the trigger guard, inside the trigger guard, very important, which will drop the bolt when you press it. I don't like this. Having a control like that inside the trigger guard is very dangerous, especially when it requires as much force to activate as this does. All right, now I've gone over some of the external differences. We'll go over the internal differences. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take these apart. I'll slide the Bren 2 out of the way for now. We'll disassemble the 805 first. Now, you may have noticed earlier, pardon me, it's the Pepsi talking, I had some trouble cycling the bolt. That is because I've heard people say this, that you can't cycle the bolt on the 805 with the safety on. That is not true. Well, I should say it's partially true. If the safety is on and the hammer is down, you just heard me click it, it is fired, then the bolt is locked forward and you can't cycle it. However, so then you have to set it to fire and cycle it. Now the hammer is cocked. Now if I set it to safe, you can still cycle the action. So yes, you can cycle the action on the 805 with the safety on, but the hammer has to be cocked for you to do so. That's a little quirk that it shares with the Scorpion Evo. So the first thing we have to do with disassembly is to remove the front pin. In actuality, you can actually field strip the gun just by removing this rear pin, taking the end cap off and sliding the bolt out, but for consistency I'm going to show it to you this way. We're going to take the whole thing apart. So first push that pin through. It's not a captive pin. However, the stock has two holes in the back here where you can store those pins while you're field stripping it. And then with that pin removed, the lower slides off of the gun. Set that aside. That's removed. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to push out this other pin. Spring clips can be a bit tough sometimes. Put that in the other hole in the stock. And now press this button that's on the end cap of the stock and slide the whole thing down. The stock and end cap comes off. Now this actually allows you to remove just the end cap. You can put then other adapters on the back or pistol brace or whatever, and the stock is on its own, but it's easier just to keep the cap and the stock separate. So that aside as well. Now with that removed, you can take the bolt out. First you have to take the recoil spring assembly out, remove the charging handle all the way back to that circular slot, set it aside. There's nowhere to store that, so you just have to keep an eye on it. And then the bolt and bolt carrier will come out just like that. There's one more bit of disassembly we can do, and that's to take the gas system apart. It's going to be a bit dirty, so my hands are going to get black. So the first thing you have to do is press this plunger. This is in the normal gas setting. The 805 has two gas settings, normal, which is what it's in now, and adverse settings. So if you have bad ammo or the rifle is very, very dirty, you set it to that and allow it to run, sends more gas in the system. But to disassemble it, press that plunger again and rotate it so that this flat is against this flat on the gas block. That's the gas cylinder. Set that to the side, and then the whole piston and op rod assembly comes out the front of the gun. And what you're left with is just the barrel, the star chamber, and the whole receiver, just as one unit, and that's as far as you need to take the 805 apart. So now we've done that, I'll disassemble the Bren 2, and I'll be able to compare how it disassembles and all of its components. Set that aside, and we'll grab Bren 2. Obviously the first thing we're going to do, check to make sure that it's clear, and obviously, and you also want to do this with the hammer down, just like the 805. First bit of assembly, a difference than disassembly now is with the Bren 2, you can't take the stock or end cap off before you take the lower off. You have to take the lower off before you can get the end cap off, and that's because of this beveled edge back here. If you try to slide it down, it just runs into that. It's not going to come off. However, another difference is that the pin that you use to take it down is captive. So now I push that pin through, it stays in place, and this lower assembly slides right off. So this is the other side now. Now here's a difference between the pistol brace and the normal stock. On the normal stock, it just has a latch inside that you would swing the stock over a little bit, open it up, and there's a latch inside that's concealed by the stock. You press that latch and the whole thing slides right off. However, on the pistol brace, there's this latch on the underside that's held in place by this captive pin, so you just push the pin through, hit that thumb latch, and then the pistol brace adapter is allowed to slide off. Set that to the side, and then with that removed, then can take captive recoil spring assembly out, and then we get to the bolt. Can also just slide out since it's not attached to the charging handle. Now with this charging handle all the way to the back, we can get it to its slot, take it all the way out, and then an additional piece. There's this bar that the charging handle interacts with. Side, and I'll explain what this does when I get to comparing the bolts. Set those to the side for now. Now we get to the gas system, and this is a little different from how the 805's gas system is. It has a regulator up here, and it actually has 3 settings. It has 1, which is a normal setting, 2, which is the adverse setting, just like the 805 for bad ammo or dirty rifle, but it also has an off setting for the Czechs, to my knowledge, don't use rifle grenades, but if you were shooting this suppressed, you could turn the gas system off and then make the rifle even quieter than it was before. So now, to get the rifle apart, you have to get it past the 0 setting, and in order to do that, you need to depress this latch that's holding it in place. Now, normally with the handguard, that latch is exposed and you just hit it with your thumb, but because I'm using the HP Industries handguard, it's shrouded and I can't get to it easily with my thumb, so I gotta use a tool. Pardon me for a second. There we go. Position, and then the gas, put you aside, the gas cylinder and the front half of the piston come out. That's the first difference you'll see. And then the upright assembly comes out. So now that is the Bren 2 entirely field strip. You're left with basically the same parts, the barrel, the chamber, upper receiver, and everything else just left on its own. So now with the 2 rifles apart, we can start comparing the differences between the 2, and I'll start with the last pieces. We'll work inverse to how we started. So you see the uppers, there's actually not that whole much different there. Plastic brass deflectors, normally this would be monolithic just like the 805 is. And different barrels. There's not a whole lot to really talk about here. They're both constructed broadly the same way. On the monolithic ones, they would be set up with these different panels for Picatinny or M-LOK. On the military guns, they would all be Picatinny. And this is the serialized component for US legal reasons. The serial number is on the side below the ejection port. And they all have the same warning labels. On this side, it'll say, have the model, 805 Bren. On this side, whoops, it'll say CZ Bren 2MS, or yeah, 2MS. So that's basically all the differences for these. Oh, another thing I should mention. The 805, for a sling, you have these sling loops at the front and back, and they're wide enough for a 1-inch sling, like my awesome chest sling there. However, the Bren 2 has a sling bar on the back, and on the normal handguard, it would have just a clip at the front for just looping through, or a paraclip. However, it also has a QD slot at the back, and if you get the HP Industries handguard, it has a QD socket additionally at the front. So you can actually set this up with a QD sling, which is very nice and a big improvement. So with that all explained, set those aside, and then we'll look at the gas systems, which are very interesting. They're both short stroke gas pistons. However, the gas piston systems that they use are quite a bit different. So on the bottom, we have the 805's gas system, which is pretty simple, actually. You just have the gas cylinder. It's got inlet holes, 2 of them. So this is the normal size one. This is the adverse one. You have vent holes. So when it's assembled, you fire the round, gas goes into the expansion chamber and hits against the head of the piston, starts moving backwards, and then once it clears those vent holes, gas vents out. By the time it's gotten to here, the bolt is already unlocked and traveling under its own momentum. And this is my conjecture here, but the design of this piston is quite a bit similar. to the design of the piston on the VZ58. Stop those from rolling away for 2 seconds. So the difference is the VZ58 piston is just one solid piece turned on a lathe with a return spring that pushes it forward, and the 805 has this whole captured return spring assembly that actually pushes it backwards against the bolt face, which is kind of curious. But they both have, you can see, a very similar style. It's a big solid head with a gas sealing groove in it. Springs, it's very simple. And the gas cylinder for the VZ58 is actually built into the gas block, so I can't bring it up separately on the table to show you. But I think the VZ58 piston was the inspiration for the 805's piston system. Obviously, they added the gas cylinder to give you an adjustable gas system for those different settings. So some people also will have an extra hole drilled for a suppressor. I haven't done that because I don't have any suppressors. Now where this gets interesting, give me a second to reassemble the VZ58. I'm not needing it anymore. Where this gets interesting is with the Bren 2. So this is the gas cylinder for the Bren 2. It also has 2 holes. It has the regular use hole when it's in the 1 position. The adverse hole, slightly larger, has an offsetting when it's perfectly horizontal. However, you'll notice that there are no vent holes on there. However, there is this hole in the front which runs all the way through it. And the piston is in 2 pieces. There's the actual piston head and the op rod. Now, the way this works is the piston sits inside the gas cylinder here, the expansion chamber is here, just like it is on the 805. However, when the gas goes in here, there is this peg on the front of the piston, and it, let's see if I can get a flashlight for you. Where did I put that thing? Here we go. Might be able, let's see if I can get it in. Might be able to see there's a through hole, not just for that small hole, but the larger one, which is the same diameter as this peg here. So the gas, that peg sits in there, and that actually shuts it off. You might be able to see. Yeah, so the holes are above where the shelf of the peg is. So this is forced to expand backwards, and once it gets to a certain point, that peg hole is opened up to the gas, and then the gas vents out forward through these holes here. And that is very nice. What that means is that when you're gripping the rifle on the 805 previously, if you grip too far forward and had your hand or your thumb like up here, you get a big blast of gas that's venting out to the sides and actually all around it. And I've gotten my thumb whacked by that before. It's kind of unpleasant. But with the Bren 2, all the gas is being vented directly forward. So even if you're gripping like this with your thumb forward, it's safe from any venting gas because the gas isn't being vented that way into you. It's just going straight forward down the barrel. I think is a very nice quality of life improvement. Now the gas piston rod itself is also quite a bit shorter and smaller and lighter overall, which helps to bring down the weight. But this whole gas piston system is very nice. The return spring for the piston rod isn't wholly captive anymore. However, it does have a groove for the tail of the spring to clip into, which holds it in place. So when you're disassembling it, that stays in place and you're not liable to lose it. So that's the big improvement with the Bren 2's gas system, which I think is very nice. So now that we've discussed those, I'll set those aside. And now we can move on to the bolts of the two. I'm going to go down a little bit there. So on top, we have the 805. On the bottom, we have the Bren 2. Now these bolts in design are pretty similar. In fact, you'd be forgiven for saying that they're the same. However, there are some differences. Similarities are, obviously, they're both AR-style rotating bolts. They have the cam studs. They run in rails. They don't have the gas pistons, obviously, because they're getting impinged on at the front there. And they've got captive firing pins at the back. I'm just going to lower this down a little bit so you can see it better. However, the 805 has a number of improvements on the 805 bolt. For one thing, it is a lot lighter. You can see it has a big scallop cut here to help reduce the weight, whereas it just has the 805 just has a blind hole at the back that, oops, not that one, the recoil spring goes into, which is captive still. But having the lighter bolt means that your recoil impulse is going to be less. So in theory, even though the 805 is heavier, which could soak up more recoil, the Bren 2 shoots just as softly as its bigger brother, even though it weighs quite a bit less. Now the major difference between these bolts, actually there's one more minor difference I want to touch on before moving on to that, and that is the disassembly of these two. To disassemble, i.e. to get the bolt separated and remove the firing pin, you need to drive out this roll pin here at the tail of the bolt. That is what is retaining the firing pin in the back, in addition to this clip. That is a pain in the ass. It means you have to have a hammer, a special tool in order to push it out, which is really annoying. I don't know why they did that. That's kind of, well, I mean, you're not going to be disassembling this bolt. I've actually never had to disassemble this bolt to clean it. The inside, if you're going to replace the firing pin though, like if it broke, the cleaning kit for this does come with a spare firing pin. It would be a pain in the ass. However, for the Bren 2, they substantially improved that. It is no longer a roll pin. Instead, it is just a regular straight pin that's held in place by an internal spring clip. You just push that out with a cartridge tip or something. It comes out on this side, and then you can release this clip for the firing pin to come out. It is spring loaded. Then you can remove the cam pin and take the bolt out. The bolt head, I should say, which is a heck of a lot nicer and a lot easier to do than that stupid funny business with the roll pin. Now, the other major difference between these two is the charging handle. On the 805, it is, whoops, out of frame. It is this simple turned piece. It is a reciprocating charging handle that is fixed into the gun, just like that. It's fixed to it, pull it, and it moves with the gun. And it's actually held in place by the recoil spring. You can see it in there. You push, you put this in like that, then the recoil spring goes all the way forward, and it's held in place by spring pressure, and now you can't, whoops, it's actually not all the way forward because it wasn't lined up perfectly straight. There we go. Yeah, so now the recoil spring is holding it in, and I can't pull it out until I take it out. Now the charging handle comes out. That was nice and simple to make, and it allowed you to share kind of a manual of arms with the VZ58, which also had a reciprocating charging handle and a manual hold open, but that's kind of outdated technique. They did with the Bren 2 was give it a non-reciprocating charging handle. So what happens is you have this in the gun. We don't need the recoil spring in order to demonstrate this, but it sits against a gun like that. So normally, when it's just cycling like normally, this piece is not connected to the bolt at all. And so, whoops, it's sitting, this hook is hooked into an additional piece inside the receiver, which you can't see because it's too dark. and way up in there. But when it's clipped up like that, which you do by bringing the charging handle forward, pulling it all the way forward, that lifts up and it allows the bolt to slide freely. However, when that's down, i.e. when you pull the whole charging handle back just that little bit, now this hook here hooks into this recess on the top of the bolt, and that allows you to move these two together as a unit, and that's also what allows you to use the charging handle as a forward assist should you have a particularly stubborn round or something just not going in battery, you need more lube, whatever. You can use you can still use a non-reciprocating charging handle as a forward assist, which is a nice bonus. Now, those have been gone over, we'll look at the last piece of the puzzle, which is the lowers and the fire control groups. So I'll start with the 805. It is an all polymer lower, however, it's not all one piece. The magazine well and the fire control housing with the pistol grip and the trigger is a separate piece that is slid on with these sets of rails here on the front of the fire control housing, and then it's pinned in place with this pin that's right below the magazine release. This was done because the 805 originally had its own, I want to say, proprietary magazine. If you look at it, it looks very similar to a G36 magazine. I'm not sure whether the two are interchangeable or not, but they function sort of the same way. The mag catch is a paddle at the back rather than a button on the side. So it was ambidextrous by nature. However, those magazines, my understanding is that they had some issues with fragility, and so they introduced a different mag well to accept AR-15 Stand-Ag magazines. And you can also see when I insert the empty magazine that this is the bolt hold open. It's just actuated by the follower like any other. However, there's no way to press it down once it is up. You see there's this button on the side which will press it up, but it's spring loaded to come back down. So when you have the empty magazine in there, pushing that button does not do anything. The trigger is fairly conventional, aside from that one quirk where, so I'll go ahead and gently let the hammer down. If it is on safe, the hammer is down, it will not, the disconnector will not snap over the engagement surface on the hammer, and that's what's keeping you from cycling the bolt when you're trying to cock it. However, when it's on fire, then it can. And so that's why now when I put it on safe, the hammer is cocked, the bolt can just slide over this freely with no issues. But that's something to be aware of. And the Scorpion fire control system is not set up exactly like this, but it still shares that quirk. It's kind of similar. Aside from that, it has a removable backstrap. Both of these have removable backstraps. However, CZ never really marketed very heavily that feature, and so pretty much all of the 805s you're going to come across have this same standard clips, same standard backstrap. It's just held in place with a pin at the bottom. It's also hollow on the inside, but it doesn't have a compartment, whereas the Bren 2 does. Aside from that, there's not a whole lot else to say about these. There's a whole lot more features on the Bren 2 lower. So in keeping with the weight loss goal for the 805 to the Bren 2, the lower receiver for the Bren 2 is all one piece of carbon reinforced polymer. What exactly that polymer is, I probably should have looked up before making this video, but it is an impact resistant polymer, wear resistant. It's going to hold up pretty well. Now there's a whole lot of other differences. I'll start at the magwell. Now I mentioned before that the Bren 2 comes in 7.62x39 as well as 5.56. There was a 7.62x39 option planned for the 805, but it never materialized. They just wanted 5.56. But for the Bren 2, it is available on 7.62x39. And the lower receiver that they use for the 7.62 guns is exactly the same as the 5.56 guns. However, on the 5.56 guns, they added in this sleeve to the magazine well because the magazines for 5.56 are ever so slightly slimmer than for the 7.62 guns. The 7.62 guns use their own proprietary magazine. They don't use AK magazines or VZ58 magazines. They're proprietary straight insert magazine. However, you can get lower receivers for the Bren 2 because they're not serialized components that will accept AK magazines. You can also get ones that accept AR pattern 7.62x39 magazines, should you so choose. However, the proprietary magazines for the 7.62x39 guns are not terribly expensive. I've seen them going for around $35 on like places like Gun Mag Warehouse. So if you wanted to go with the 7.62x39 for suppression reasons, you're not going to break the bank with magazines. They're out there and available. Anyway, so there's that. And the bolt hold open, come on, for the Bren 2 is actually fairly typical, looks just like an AR, functions just like an AR-15 bolt release. You have the paddle on the side, which you push, and then pushes the follower down. It's got the tab on the bottom to open it. However, it does have this one control in the trigger guard that I showed before, and that is attached directly to the same ping pong paddle. You can see when I press the ping pong paddle, the whole thing rises up. It's connected by just hooking over it directly. Whoops, I'm too high up. Hooking over it directly there. So when one moves, the other does as well. It's nice to keep things simple. But as you mentioned earlier, I'm not going to be using it for that purpose. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention was the ambidextrous magazine release between the two. So they're both ambidextrous, but they both function differently. The 805 has one button on the side, which moves the whole magazine catch assembly straight out, but it also has one on the left that makes it pivot on a pivot point inside the receiver. It works, it does the job. However, for the Bren 2, they changed up the design, so it still has one on the right side for it to use with your finger, but it also has this additional left side one that is not a button like the 805s. It is this lever that also moves the magazine catch in a straight out fashion. It does not pivot. You'll notice that the 805 magazine catch, since it pivots, it's still this bit at the bottom of the magazine catch doesn't move as much as the top part. So you could theoretically get a stuck magazine that way and have to pull it out manually, whereas this ensures that it definitely moves in the same direction no matter which side you use and that it's going to clear. So a minor improvement. I'm not really sure if that was necessary. I don't normally drop magazines with the left side magazine release because I'm right-handed, but it's there, and I guess it is somewhat of an improvement. The trigger fire control group is quite a bit different. The Bren 2 does not have the issue with cocking the hammer on safe that the 805 does. You can put the gun on safe, fire it on fire, it'll cock that, and it'll cock on safe. So you will always be able to cock the gun and make sure the gun is safe no matter what. Although you see the fire control systems are quite a bit different. The Bren 2 has linearly traveling coil spring to drive the hammer forward, whereas the 805 just has a more traditional torsion spring with two legs to propel it forward. Although the disconnector systems are pretty much the same. There's not a whole lot of different there, aside from, being able to cock it with safety. Aside from that, some are pretty much the same way with the tail at the back, a pin at the front. The difference being that on the Bren 2, it is a captive pin, whereas it's not on the 805. And that is just about all the differences between, the trigger on the 805 or the Bren 2 is made out of polymer, and it's metal on the 805. That is just about all of the similarities and differences between these two rifles. So now I'm going to go ahead and put them back together. I'll start with the Bren 2, get all the pieces back here, wherever they may be. Bring this back out. Grab the piston. Alright, so start putting the piston back in. You just drop it in from the front. There's a hole. There has to line up with, and it'll fall in. Oops. And then you have to drop the piston. So that, get it lined up wherever that dang hole is. There we go, fell in. You can drop the piston head on top of it, and then the gas regulator. Snap that back to position 1. So the gas piston is assembled. Got to put in the claw for the charging handle that way. And you can, and this is, at this point is when you would reverse the charging handle, put it on the right side if you're left-handed, or the left side if you're right-handed. I am right-handed, so it goes on the left side. Snap it forward. Take the bolt, and when you're assembling it, you want to make sure that the bolt is in the forward, which is the unlock position, so that the cam stud aligns up with this groove in the receiver, and there are 2 of them. So we gotta get it lined up with both. Come on. Hard to do this with the camera in my face. There we go. Come on. There we go. So here's a demonstration. Right now, the charging handle is in the fully forward position. I can move the bolt back, and the charging handle is not going to move with it. However, if I snap it back just a little bit, then if I move the bolt, the charging handle is going to move with it. Now it's snapped forward, so now the bolt is going to travel all on its own. So then take the coil spring. Oops, I missed. Lined up the right hole. And then slide. Come on. Brace adapter on. Come on. It's harder than it looks. Normally not this tricky. There we go. I think. Oh wait, I know. There we go. Snap that pin in. It's in place. And you can rock the lower on. It's pin in, and then function check. Fully assembled Bren 2 ready to go. Now we'll do the 805. Do basically the same thing. It's just a little bit easier to reassemble the 805 because you have the whole piston and return spring assembly is one thing. There's no 2 pieces. Still have to line it up with the hole for the operating rods. There we go. Now when you're reassembling it, you want to make sure that this flat, which has the caliber marking on it, lines up with this flat on the gas block, so you can drop it right on. And then you have to depress that plunger. Rotate it. Now it's in the adverse setting, but I want it in the normal setting. So now that is taken care of. Now we can drop the bolt back in and then line it up the hole for the charging handle. Finagle that in. You can see that the operating rod is pushing backwards from its spring, so it will not, the bolt will not sit in its lock position because it's constantly being pushed by that return spring. So it's going to spring a little bit when you put it back together. But once you get the coil spring in there and then the buttstock on, come on. Careful not to pinch your fingers on this step. You have to press the spring a little bit. There we go. Now it'll sit in its lock position because it's got another spring pushing against it. And then you just rock the lower on, get the pins, push those back into place. Function check. Boom. 805 is back together. So there you have it. A not so brief overview. This video has probably run kind of long by now. overview of these two modern Czech rifles, the two most modern Czech rifles to have been in service with the Czech military. Obviously, probably kind of niche information, but I wanted to have this information. I figured someone else out there would also want to know more about the differences in the evolution from the CZ805 Bren 1 to the CZ Bren 2. So now the information is out there, and I hope you enjoyed it. Now, I'm going to be using the Bren 2 here at the upcoming two-gun match, and I'll probably be using it for many other matches to come. I'm still going to keep my 805. I've used it a lot. It has a lot of sentimental value to me, and I will still use it on and off as I see fit, mostly for a giggle factor because this thing weighs a ton. It'll just be fun to lug around at a match and have people ooh and ah over, because not many people are probably going to still be shooting these things now that the Bren 2 is out there and available. So, thank you very much for watching. Hope you learned something today about these very fascinating rifles, and hope you stick around to learn some more things about them. At some point, I'm also going to make a larger video going over all of the Czech military rifles, starting with the VZ24. I'm still missing a VZ52 or 52-57 rifle. So once I get my hands on one of those, then I will be able to make that video and go over the whole timeline from the creation of Czechoslovakia as an independent nation to the present day. So again, thank you much for watching. Take care.